My name is Casey Byers, landscape architect with Bolton and Mink.
And I'm Shannon Gapp. I'm also a landscape designer with Bolton and Mink. I also have a background in community and development as well.
She's kind of like the star athlete on the group here. Anyway, we're here tonight to present the draft strategic master plan report. This has been a planning process that has been ongoing for roughly 4 or 5 months. It's involved a tremendous amount of community input and participation, as well as city staff time and others throughout the community. So very grateful for everyone's participation on this effort, and really tonight is to just present kind of what this report is going to look like, some of the contents of it, and how the city is going to use this as a guiding document for Parks and Rec improvements moving forward in the city of Marshalltown. So we've structured this so you get an idea of kind of what the report's going to look like, kind of what the pages are going to consist of, and really where to find information. It's set up so that there's specific sections throughout the report covering the executive summary, vision and goals, data collection and community input, our master plan recommendations, the implementation and planning process for making these improvements happen, and then some resources in the appendix at the end of the report. The appendix is going to have a summary of all community input, so all the survey results. We're going to have all the park inventory information in there, as well as all the recommendations for each and every park. So it's a pretty robust document. The executive summary, so really the purpose of this plan is to guide the city of Marshalltown and maintain their existing park and recreation resources, but planning for the future. That's kind of the most important piece of this, is how do we set up for success in the future. This was a collaborative process, as I described. We tried to engage the community, inform the community, and then provide recommendations, and then kind of an outline for implementation to make those recommendations happen. So that's really kind of the 4-step process of this entire project. How to use this master plan. Something that comes out of these processes a lot is, great, we got this great report, it's got a lot of information in it, what do we do with it? So what we try to do is make this fairly as concise as we can, but provide enough information that the city staff and the public can look at this, look at the contents of it, easily find a description of what parks there are, what are the amenities in the parks currently, and then what are the what is the community values and what's the community input that's driving the recommendations found within this report. And then provide a description of how the city can better allocate resources, look at capital improvement spending, and then look at implementation strategies for all things Parks and Rec. So it's really, it's just a guiding document with material in it that is easy to find and really easy to use. That was kind of our main goal there. The vision for this project from the city, this is directly out of the RFP for this project, is to offer quality, accessible, and amenity-rich parks, trails, open space, and recreation opportunities for its citizens. That is, as good of a vision statement as I could come up with. That's, it really kind of encompasses why the city is pursuing this project, and really why they found this is important to the city's community members and growth moving forward. The main objective is to provide a comprehensive, usable document which outlines, future growth for Parks and Rec Department, and to evolve as recreation trends change. One thing that we're going to illustrate in here is that Parks and Rec trends change quite frequently. Certain things become more popular, certain sports and activities become less popular. So it's really trying to kind of forecast those trends and better position the city to adapt their recreation offerings to its citizens. The primary goals, these are pre-project goals that we came up with the city for this project, and the outcome, which is this report, is to, number one, broaden park diversity. Look at how we can offer different things to different people, different ethnicities, ages, abilities, really just kind of change, what a typical park looks like. Promote inclusive play and accessibility. That's a resounding theme in our recommendations. Trying to get more people to and in the parks, and promote an inclusive environment within Parks and Recreation. We looked at operations within the department and strategies for improving day-to-day operations. We also want to provide ultimately a framework for short, mid, and long-term improvements. So this is a 10-year plan, essentially. Goes a little beyond that probably. But we're looking at taking our recommendations and illustrating which are kind of the key most important pieces to get done in the next 0 to 3 years, and then the next 4 to 6 and 7 years, and then 7+ years. So trying to help the city kind of prioritize what the greatest needs are. And we also want to look at ecologically sustainable solutions. So looking at trying to improve our ecosystem diversity within parks and open space. Currently, there's a lot of parks are mown grass. There's an opportunity to maybe change some things and bring in some more naturalized settings, appropriately scaled. But that's becoming that's a trend in parks and open space, and trying to find ways to be a little smarter with solutions in parks.
All right, well, the next item we're going to touch upon is data collection and community input. And I'm just going to kind of briefly explain our process. One of the first things we did as part of this plan was a complete inventory of all of Marshalltown's parks. So we went to each one, took note of, are there sidewalks available? Is there lighting? What types of play equipment, et cetera? We really wanted to have a full understanding of what the existing conditions are for the physical recreation spaces. That way we can make sure that our recommendations align with the needs of the community. We also executed an extensive and transparent outreach plan. This was really kind of a key component. We wanted to better understand and determine the community's needs. And then we also did a pretty thorough analysis of department operations as well. We did a couple community comparisons with communities of similar sizes, and then we also did the NRPA, I believe that's National Parks and Recreation Association, evaluation as well, which Casey's going to describe later in this presentation. Part of this, we also created some existing parks and trails maps. We really wanted to make sure that, Marshalltown has over 20 parks, and we wanted to easily show which parks are located where. We also took some of the existing GIS data and tried to make it easier to understand. So we also showed some of the Marshalltown trails. So not just the Lynn Creek Recreational Trail, but also, designated bike routes. And these are a little small on this screen, but within the document, we've got a full page dedicated to each of them. And then we also created service areas maps, and this shows a 1/4 mile and a 1/2 mile buffer around each of the parks. And one of the things I've learned throughout planning is that a 1/4 mile generally relates to about a 5-minute walk, and a 1/2 mile relates to about a 10-minute walk, and we really want to make sure that community members have a park that's within about a 10-minute walk of their home. So just to expand a little bit more on the park system inventory, kind of expanding on that, we looked at playgrounds, play equipment, ball fields, courts, all of these different things. And for each of the parks, we have a table similar to what we show on the right, really kind of honing in on the different elements within each park. And at the very back in the appendix, we have every single one of these listed. So, that's going to be available to everybody. We also kind of built upon this and created an inventory summary chart, and this was really building upon information that the city already had. Just making sure that it was up to date, included all the elements that we saw throughout our inventory, and so you can easily see in one place how many acres each park is, how many basketball courts are there, how many shelters, etc. And we think this will be a really important tool moving forward. This is something we can hand off to the city, and as new parks are created, as new play equipment goes in, that's something that they can track. The outreach plan was really a key component of this and essentially guided all of our recommendations throughout the process. One thing we really wanted to include was multiple opportunities and avenues for public input. So the process started with a project kickoff event, and that was actually coupled with the Mega 10 updates announcement. And so that was great. We had a lot of people there, and it was a great way to start the project. We also had comment cards and then associated comment boxes like you can see in the picture. So people throughout the community could be at a park and think of an idea and put it right in there. They don't have to go to any of our public input meetings. We also did an extensive community input survey, and this was available online. We had an English version. We also created a Spanish version, and then through looking at the results that we obtained, we realized that some of the younger population was kind of being underrepresented, and so we wanted to make sure that we were reaching out to them as well. So we actually administered the survey in the schools and then also created a teen-specific survey that was tailored, kind of determining more of their unique needs. We also had online and social media outreach. We had a project Facebook page that we were posting kind of key updates when these type of meetings would be. And we also had a park tour and open house event, and that was a great way to actually get people in the community out to the parks and see firsthand some of the recommendations that we have. Oktoberfest, I mean, it's Marshalltown's biggest event, and so we thought that was a great opportunity to get some more input. And then that kind of led us to this meeting tonight. We just want to share kind of a summary of the draft, what the chapters entail, and then the next step will be presenting to council for adoption. So just to kind of summarize what we heard from the community input survey, we've had this board at the last couple of meetings, and it's really summarizing what we heard, what we saw within the survey. Some of the key needs were maintenance, accessibility, safety and visibility, park diversity, kind of having opportunities for all types of people within the community, and then also ideas for CIP, capital improvement program considerations as well. To expand upon that a little more, when we first administered the survey online, we received, I think, 270 responses, which was great. But like we said, we didn't quite have that youth population being represented. And by adding it in the school, we received over 400 more. And then by making the teen-specific tailored survey, we received over 400 more, as well as several hard copy surveys. And altogether, we received over 1,000 survey results, which is actually really impressive for a community of this size.
Of any size.
Yeah, exactly. So we started the survey with just kind of a fun little icebreaker question. What words would you use to describe recreation? And I love the results that people said, you know, healthy, relaxing, outdoors, family. These are all great things that we want to make sure that we're providing for the community. We also asked about quality of life. How important are the parks, trails, and open space to Marshalltown's overall quality of life? And as you can see, I mean, everyone thinks that they're important, if not very important, which is great. One of the other things we looked at was asking the community members what activities and amenities Marshalltown should focus on over the next 5 to 10 years. And there's quite a few that stood out, but the number one topic was maintenance of existing parks and trails. That was huge. Shortly behind that was just restrooms, making sure that we have these things available for the community that are of high quality. There were also survey results relating to the trails, water access, playground equipment, and then just thinking of sports as well. So to kind of build upon the trails, we asked them, you know, what discourages you from currently using the trails? And I think the biggest responses were, I believe it's a lack of connectivity and
Safety.
lack of connectivity, safety, proximity to the trails, and the condition of the trails. Just to kind of piggyback off that last question, this really kind of instilled some of the things we had already heard. What do you believe are the most important issues for this plan to address? And once again, it was the condition of existing park structures. We really want to fix what we already have before kind of adding new elements. Another big one was funding, and then the disconnects or gaps within the trail system, and then safety concerns. And so these are all things that we tried to address within the plan. And then kind of the last key trend from the survey is we identified a couple underserved groups. Based on the question, do you feel there are enough parks, trails, and open spaces for the following groups? We really identified that, you know, teens, seniors, and those with special needs might need a little more opportunities within the community.
So at a department level, we did a performance evaluation with the NRPA, which involved collecting information from probably multiple different city departments, examining finances, assets, facilities. It's a pretty robust survey, and it's actually something that has caught on a lot more. A lot more communities are inputting this data into the NRPA database, and allows different Parks and Rec departments to compare themselves across the nation to other agencies and see how their offerings compare. This particular evaluation compared Marshalltown to all participating communities across the United States with populations of 22,000 to 37,000 people. A couple, I'm not going to touch on all these, but a few key findings in this represented that Marshalltown is somewhat understaffed as compared to other communities. The amount of revenue that Marshalltown is bringing in with the existing Parks Department is a little below the national median, but as we looked at some of the other participating communities in Iowa, it's really not that far below. But one thing that stood out to us was, the annual operating budget was substantially lower than the national median. So this just kind of puts in perspective, just kind of where some of these shortcomings are maybe coming from. We did look at acres of parks. Marshalltown is, right there with the national median based on their population, so that's pretty good. But some of the themes that came out of this were, residents are visiting Marshalltown parks and trails frequently. Operating with fewer staff members. If anyone ever complains about maintenance, I think it's good to keep in mind that there's pretty well understaffed for the amount of parks and open space that Marshalltown offers. So this is an important piece of information, and this was used in multiple other studies that we performed. I apologize if some of this information is a little small in here, but obviously in the report this will be much more legible. But we took that department evaluation, and then we reached out to several communities throughout the state, Mason City, Marion, Clinton, and Ottumwa, to look at their Parks and Rec amenities and compare them to Marshalltown as well. As you can see, Marshalltown is, keep pointing to the wrong one, is right at the top of the list here. But looking at operating expenditures per capita, Marshalltown's at $59 per person. Mason City's at $50, Marion 68, Clinton at 48, Ottumwa at 84. So it kind of gives you a comparison to see where those expenses sit. Some of these communities have large expanses of open space. Some of these are kind of undeveloped parks, so that kind of drives up the number as far as acres of parks per 1,000. So seemingly Marshalltown's a little lower than that, but some of those communities just have really large open spaces. We also just looked at just a kind of a demographics comparison, and kind of looking at median household income and median home values. One of the comments we received in one of the other meetings was, oh well, Marshalltown is poor or doesn't have as much money as other communities. So we wanted to also compare where Marshalltown stood compared to the other communities that we were evaluating, and it's really not that out of line, and compared to Mason City and Clinton and Ottumwa, Marshalltown's median household income is actually higher, and although the median home value is also a bit higher. So kind of gives a good comparison that these are pretty good representative communities to compare to. The master plan recommendations specifically, we tried to break this down into identifying priority parks. We came up with recommendations for every park and every open space, trails, recreation, but we also try to identify priority parks. And these parks are either the most heavily used parks, and they're also some of the most underutilized parks. And then there's certain areas that we just saw needed the most improvement. So that's kind of how we determine what the priority parks were. And some of that was based on community input survey as well as, where do people like to go and where do they not like to go. We broke these into short, mid, and long-term recommendations based on the community input and what the greatest needs were. We looked at proposed trail connections. Trails is a priority area along with physical parks as well. And then we also looked at long-range park attractions. These are the things that we hope the city can start to implement as the city starts to improve existing facilities, restrooms, maintenance, that kind of thing. Here's just a map of the priority parks: Lawrence Park, West End, Elks, Riverview, BPW, Peterson Park, Anson Park, the skate park, and then Kiwanis Park, and then there's we also illustrated 2 future parks on there as well that the city has in their possession. And then the last piece of this would be the trails. So within the document, we want to make this pretty user friendly, so we created these charts for each one of the priority parks, actually for each park. And on the very left-hand side of this, we've broken these into short, mid, and long-term goals. Each one of these recommendations corresponds to a community value. So you can see the ones that are representing more community values might be something to put higher on the list of priorities because it's touching on more things that are important to the community. And then we have a description of the actual improvement itself, such as creating connections to a restroom or connections to a shelter, replace restroom, replace shelter, things like that. Replace play equipment, add additional play equipment. And then we just have a cost range over here. This is just literally as simple as a dollar sign. It's either $1 sign, 2, or 3. And it's just to try to represent an order of magnitude for the cost of the improvements and to be able to compare them across the board to other improvements. Really to just kind of put it into a scale. We also looked at recreation programming. This is a really critical piece of the recreation offerings in Marshalltown and in any community is, what engages users outside of just the physical park space itself. So we worked with the city to come up with this list of program offerings. We took this list, categorized it by age, kind of color-coded it. Jenny was a very big help for pulling this information together. The city actually has a pretty substantial kind of log of participation rates, users, programs they offer now or didn't or used to offer. So we wanted to include that in the report so people understood really what are the offerings currently, what are the age groups, and then what are the participation rates for the last 4 years. This can help the city evaluate which programs are more successful, maybe which programs aren't as quite successful and should maybe be thought through a little harder. And then we also have the programs that the city no longer offers. Within this, we also drew attention to programs that were specifically geared towards those with special needs. Marshalltown has a lot of offerings for those with disabilities and special needs, and we wanted to draw attention to that. And we also wanted to point out that all of these programs can be adapted to help those with a disability or a special need. So that's a critical piece of this report.
A couple of the other items we wanted to touch upon were placemaking and wayfinding. These are key topics to address in really any community planning effort, but we really wanted to have these tailored specifically to parks and recreation. These different offerings can help build community character, develop memorable experiences, kind of establish branding or identity. Also, opportunities for directional signage, whether on a trail, if you turn off at this location, you can get to this park, or this direction takes you to downtown, things like that. Public art, that's also a huge component, and then educational signage. And you can see from some of the images there, you know, a memorable experience might be going through the Children's Discovery Garden Tunnel, or, you know, there's already some community character being built in the downtown. In terms of branding and identity, we noticed that Assistance League Park, actually, a lot of the community members were calling it Turtle Park because it has this amazing turtle in it. And that's something that this park can build upon, and I think other parks can work to build their own identity as well. You know, public art, we love seeing kind of some of the different things in Riverview Park, and then educational signage. We took a quick look at Grimes Farms, and I think there's some good examples there and something that Marshalltown should look into for their city parks as well. One of the biggest things we noticed in our inventory process was accessibility and connections. In a lot of parks, there's not many sidewalks, not many connections to really any of the play equipment. And this is important for ADA, but even really thinking about anyone in general, if there's parents with young children that are trying to push a stroller, it's hard to even get to some of the different play equipment or the shelters or the restrooms. And then also just accessibility to and within the parks. A lot of people love the Lynn Creek Trail, but they can't maybe get to all the different parks from the Lynn Creek Trail currently. So trails were definitely a big priority that we noticed, and we did it similarly as we did the other recommendations. You know, each one relates to the community values as well as has kind of an associated cost with it as well. Inclusive play and programming, this is also huge. We really want to make sure that all of the parks as well as the programs are really available for all ages and all abilities. Some of the ways you can do this is through things like musical playgrounds. That's kind of a big up and coming thing. Also enabling or healing gardens, like you can see in the image to the right. And then inclusive parks as a whole. There's an example here from Ankeny, Iowa. It's the Miracle League Park. And it's really going to show that other Iowa communities find this as something to invest in. And I think it's something Marshalltown should look into as well. And then also of huge importance is the protecting, preserving, and enhancing natural resources. One of the things we talk about is landscape diversity, and this can mean a lot of different things. It could be incorporating more native plant species. It could be developing pollinator gardens, you know, naturalizing certain areas of the park. That helps build wildlife habitat, and it also creates a lot of opportunities for outdoor education as well.
Yeah, an important piece on the natural resources too is, you know, it's in terms of diversifying park offerings. You know, these are spaces that kind of go above and beyond just the normal park. You know, gets away from swings and merry-go-rounds and things that are fun, but you know, there's a certain population that's looking to, you know, do something a little different. So when we were actually touring the parks, we ran into a gentleman that was talking to us about fishing, and you know, told us every species that he's caught in these detention areas on the south side of town. So it was just an interesting perspective to get, and you know, it's something to keep in mind that's, you know, pretty important in terms of the diversity of offerings in Marshalltown. So it's a good thing to keep exploring. A section in the report touches on maintenance and operations. This is really just trying to help the city kind of evaluate maintenance and look at how to describe it or categorize it, and maybe look at ways to, you know, prioritize where to spend time and, you know, where to not spend so much time. You know, one thing that we looked at is, you know, mowing specifically. That's one area that might be able to be reduced. You know, planting annuals versus perennials, and maybe diversifying those planter beds a bit. Might take up a little less time. Kristen's doing a fantastic job with all the annual beds in town, but there might be a way to keep that same program going, but reduce the daily input that goes into it. And we also looked at, you know, ways to just improve the processes. So within the report, there's just a kind of a description of certain things the city can do to maybe improve those processes. Operations and policy guidelines. So There's certain policies within the city that might need to be revised. One pertains to nuisance species and yards, and what is considered lawn versus what's considered a natural landscape. Looking at traditional bluegrass and looking at native prairie species. There's certain things the city will want to look at in terms of really what's right for parks and rec spaces, and those policies may need to change to promote different things within parks and open space versus residential yards. A key piece to operations is determining the right team. We've identified a need for additional staff. There's some shortcomings there as far as the amount of staff in the Parks Department. So looking at how to assemble the team in the right manner, maybe there's a component within another city department that could take on a different task, and it's just really working on a collaborative process with other city departments to maybe make up for some of the shortcomings in maintenance staff. Volunteers and donors is a critical component of every park system in any city. A lot of these spaces involve donors, involve volunteer time to get the pieces implemented. The City of Marshalltown's already doing some of this. Mega 10 Park is a wonderful example of how many community members came together to create a pretty remarkable opportunity for the city and a great amenity. Communication's kind of the last piece within this section in the report. And really this is just about, it's about marketing, it's about communicating projects throughout the community. Certain people may not know that the city's trying to raise money for a certain thing, or that the city has certain plans to do an improvement project. So really trying ways to promote Parks and Rec within the city and really kind of create that buzz. This document's certainly going to help do that, but I think the city is tasked with kind of keeping that buzz going. Implementation planning. This plan's only as good as the implementation strategies behind it. So this section actually looks at describing how to prioritize projects, where to start. One thing that was very apparent from this community input was to fix what is broken first. There's, when our inventory, there's a lot of vandalism, there's a lot of graffiti, there's restrooms that aren't in that great a shape. And the city's already taken measures to improve those. But really, people want to see new sidewalks, they want to see new restrooms, and that was kind of the most important piece that was made very clear to us. So focusing on community priorities first, that's a common theme in this report, and that'll allow the city to pursue long-range attractions. Considering alternative funding sources and solutions, a component of the report has a list of federal, state, and local funding sources that are specific to Marshalltown and the state of Iowa. So that can be used to, there's probably 50, 60 of these that we're going to list in here, and these are all current. It's currently in process. We're trying to refine this list and make sure that everything in there that is current and still offering funding. But that'll be a great resource for the city to look at, as well as local funders and donors. It's critically important. But that's all covered in the implementation planning piece of this. I spoke a little bit about long-range projects. These are the improvements that we kind of thought, these are kind of like wish list items. These are things that community members, community groups have brought to our attention. Natural playscapes, splash pads, climbing wall, community gardens. These are all things that are what we consider as kind of a regional attraction, really. These are the things that people come from surrounding communities to go to, which is great. They also cater to Marshalltown residents as well. And we've approached this the same way that we approached every other recommendation, we just kind of put it in its own category as to say, you know, although these are called long-range attractions, you know, maybe they are, you know, one of these does fit in the next 3 years or 5 years or 7 years. But really, the city should focus on those priority improvements first, and then start to look at how to incorporate some of these attractions. Kind of lastly, the resources and appendix piece, I spoke about this a little bit earlier, but this will have, these will kind of be standalone items to this document, just to reduce the overall page count of this thing. The document itself is about 60 pages. With each one of the appendix items, it's probably 200 pages. So these will all be made available. I'm assuming the city will have this, you know, posted somewhere in a digital format that people can access it. But the park system inventory, all the community input survey results, all the youth survey results, and then all the recommendations for all the parks will be found within that appendix. Next steps, you know, this is kind of the last piece in the puzzle here. We'll, you know, gain whatever feedback is remaining out there on the report from city staff and the Park Advisory Board, and then revise this document as necessary over the next couple weeks, and ultimately turn it over to City Council for consideration as a guiding document for the city. And that is it. I do have a copy of where we are right now in draft form, so anyone can page through this. I've also provided Ann a PDF of it as well. I'm sure we can make that available. And like I said, I think we're shooting for November 13 for a City Council meeting to try to get this on the agenda for adoption. So, any questions?
For those that aren't able to participate today that have feedback, what's the best way to get it to you?
Probably email me, or email Ann, or
Sure.
to the city. Find its way to me.
And how is it going to be advertised? Because I know, like, it came up 2 days ago on Park and Rec site at 4:30 when people are still working.
Well, we've had this meeting scheduled to coincide with the Parks Board, the Advisory Board, because this is kind of our first time really presenting the entire document in draft form. So I would assume if the city will make this available in a PDF for download if anyone wants to find it. That'll be up for the city to post.
I mean, we have been making press releases for all these events. We've been sharing them on the project Facebook page, sharing them with the city, really doing our best to get those involved that are interested.
But
I can send it to Ann. Would that work? Perfect.
yeah, I think it's just it's the 2018-2028 strategic master plan.
Yeah, I know you can just search it and it'll come right up in your options and go right to it.
And I think if we can get the PDF online, we can post a link there and also through the Parks Department Facebook page as well.
It'd be nice if we could get put on the radio station.
That would be great.
When we do our radio about
Mm-hmm.
that will be nature.
Be glad to, no problem.
Yeah, we definitely want to be as open and inclusive as possible. Love the feedback.
We did take our comment boxes down from the parks. Brad gave those back to us today. Wasp free. Yeah, I haven't actually opened them.
They weren't lost free when we picked them up.
Yeah. But no, it's been a great process. We've gotten a tremendous amount of community input, and I think this, you know, adequately represents kind of the voice of the community. So couldn't have come up with these recommendations had we not had so much input.
Yeah, I mean, over 1,000 survey responses is incredible.
It was, we didn't really touch on it too much, but the trend from when we had the overall community input survey and then when we distributed it to the middle school and high school, you know, we went from 270 responses to 800 or 700, and then we got another couple hundred more, but the trends didn't really change, which was pretty remarkable.
Yeah, we were really interested to find that, you know, top priorities were still maintenance, restrooms, trails, things like
Yeah.
that.
But at the one last meeting, you guys only got responses from the middle school. Did you ever get any from the high school?
We never did. 7th and 8th graders, very active citizens, actually.
Slacking on those high school.
Well, and it actually, it coincided, it sounds like they were all getting like a laptop or a Chromebook. So I think that was kind of a requirement of, here you go, now let's try them out and do the survey. And we were sitting at work, and I would get emails when survey responses came in, or like a daily input, and all of a sudden it went from 270 to 600, and I was like, whoa. So it was kind of neat to see, as
I
well
thought
as.
it was great. I mean, a lot of times the younger population doesn't really get involved in these type of processes or these surveys, and so it was great to see their input and so many people interested.
Yeah, and that was, you know, that was a direct response to the overall input survey, and the comment boxes was, there are not enough opportunities for youth, or teenagers specifically. So, you know, we said, well, how do we go about finding out what they want to do? So that we completely revised the survey and included images and various things, and you know, it was pretty interesting to see kind of what the youth were interested in.
Yeah, we even did some visual preferencing on some of the ideas. I mean, we're not always sure what teens are interested in, what they want to do, so we provided lots of options, things that you don't normally see in a park. We had like a chalk or graffiti wall or BMX type things that are a little maybe more risky. I think that's sometimes what teens are interested in.
And that's definitely a trend in Parks and Rec right now, is, you know, American Ninja Warrior style parkour courses, and anything that promotes a higher degree of difficulty and more likelihood of a broken bone seems to be
I've seen a
attractive.
couple examples of those in Minnesota, and they're highly popular.
Yeah, one thing that was, you know, another point that was brought out of that piece too is, you know, a lot of the teens, a lot of the youth wrote in soccer and basketball, and so it kind of goes back to that awareness that, you know, a lot of people wrote in comments that there are no basketball courts, there are no places to play soccer, and it's, well, there are.
Yeah, during our
not in-
inventory, we found plenty of them, but
They're-
maybe it was the condition. Maybe they want to
Yeah,
see it a little.
they're not in that great shape, and so that kind of goes back to that. Let's update those. Let's make, you know, people more aware of them. I was astounded by how many people wrote in soccer fields and basketball courts.
Any other questions?
Okay.
Yeah,
You
go
talked
ahead.
about priority parks,
Mm-hmm.
and some of them, you get like 5 or 6 or so,
We had like,
There's 9 actually.
qualified those as priority, meaning
yeah.
needing the most work, or the most important to that neighborhood, or what caused that to be a priority park?
So one of the questions on the survey was about which park you use most frequently. And so we took a couple of the parks that were used most frequently, and we also looked at some of the parks that were used very little, and included those. And we also, you know, when we were looking at those, we tried to look at, okay, why are these used the most? Or why are these, you know, used the least? And from that, we started to put together a list of, you know, these are the ones that need the most work, to either cater to the amount of people using them, or to get more people to use them. We also found some that had more significant safety concerns. Some had more graffiti, more vandalism, so let's figure out how to reduce that, you know, and make it more of an asset.
Those interpretations were done by you folks, or were they guided by the survey, saying, we really think Lawrence Park ought to be expanded on?
Some of it came from looking at how, like, when people wrote in, like, some people wrote in that they won't go to BPW Park because they don't feel safe, or, Lawrence Park, for example, we saw this as a really, an opportunity with the trail, the proximity to the trail. It's a somewhat underutilized park. It's got, a play structure and a swing, not a whole lot else going on. So we thought, well, maybe this could be a good trailside amenity. So that kind of moved it, up a little bit as a priority, and thought that's a great opportunity to kind of diversify the offerings there. And it's now catering not only as just a neighborhood park, but also as a potential trailside amenity.
It's like that one really tripped my mind to think that that is a very small,
Mm-hmm.
way off in the corner park
Yeah.
until this trail comes
Yeah.
along and is right next to
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
it could be a trailhead
Change
or
the whole use of that
amenity
area.
in
Yeah.
general.
So I just wondered what caused them to be.
Yeah.
by-
So some of it was our interpretation of community comment, the input survey, as well as looking at the inventory. When we started inventorying all the equipment, all the age and condition of the equipment, Kiwanis Park is a great example. This is a fairly localized park for the south end of town there. It's got a lot of residents in the service area of that park. And it didn't seem like it was being utilized. But it's an enormous park, comparative to some of the others. There's a lot of different amenities, but a lot of the amenities just weren't in that great a shape. So we're thinking, from the standpoint of this could cater to a lot of people. It's centrally located for the south side of town. Maybe could be maybe a bigger revenue source, once the shelter's updated a little bit, more people having events there. So that's kind of how we started to evaluate some of the parks like that.
Yeah, I mean, that one specifically, we thought it had a lot of opportunities. It's one of the few parks that actually has quite a bit of parking available. It has an enclosed shelter that can be rented out. Just giving a little bit of a facelift, I think could really bring a lot more people to that park.
Yep.
In respect to the long-range plans,
Mhm.
the groups that have been working towards raising funds for those amenities that we were given a green light 5 years ago, specifically Splash Pad, how is that going to be incorporated? Do we know?
That'll ultimately be up for the city to determine. What we try to do in the report is prioritize the recommendations based on the community input, with the understanding that there are certain things like splash pads that do have some support behind them. So including that as one of those items that the city should strongly consider as they begin to make these improvements. We wanted to make sure that was represented. So speaking specifically to how the city is going to decide on that and which ones they're going to choose to incorporate, not really within our control at this point, but we wanted to make sure that it was
Highlighted.
represented in the report.
Thank you. One other question we have on the priority parks. I know that I had shared with you guys and also with Ann some ideas that we had for connecting parks, connecting things throughout the city, your different trailheads, et cetera. Is there, from the south side to the north side, okay, if you're talking Kiwanis going up to Riverview, is there any, vision in having those connect?
Yes, we actually do have a proposed trails map, which is included in the document.
And I apologize, I just like.
No, it's okay.
Not work,
Nope,
so.
not a problem.
That specific map wasn't actually in the presentation, but it's within the report.
Okay, great.
And so that looks at kind of, connecting these dots.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
That's it's a difficult component, just from a right-of-way standpoint and, widening sidewalks and doing other things. But we drew attention to where we thought, the options may exist that are a little more achievable, but definitely kind of fills the gaps in circulation. Any others? So we'll be working with the city to figure out how to make this available. Like I said, November 13th, it'll be up for city council recommendation or consideration. And we'll make sure the draft is available somewhere. And if you have any comments, to filter those through the city to get to us.
The deadline for that comments is going to go to the council on the 13th, I believe, is the last time that you wanted those comments.
That's an excellent question. I would say, I would say November 1st. So the next couple weeks. I think that's probably adequate. If there's additional comments that come in after that, we'll surely, look at them and consider them. Just as far as making revisions.
Yeah, I mean, we're more than happy to make any updates or revisions. We want to make sure this plan represents the community well.
Thank you very much.